Thanks, Ryan. I'm Heidi, and I am one of the 4 girls from Tabor who went to the Holy Land. So this picture, I'm going to talk about just some of the biblical sites that we went to. That was one of the objectives of the trip. So we left January 3rd and got back January 24th. So it was a 3-week trip. It was long and sometimes really long, but it was really good. We had 12 Tabor and Bethel students total and 19 adults. Just to give you kind of an idea of Israel versus Kansas, this is a size comparison. We think everything seemed pretty close together when we were there. It was like a 2-hour drive when we were in a big city, or we were in the desert, or at a mountain, whereas in Kansas, you drive and it's flat, so. These are some of the objectives of the trip: to visit and learn about the historical and biblical sites, to observe and experience the major religions, to really observe the current conflict, and really take time to reflect and worship together. So, these are just a few of the places that we visited. As you can see, there's the view of the Promised Land that Moses probably saw. That was really cool for me, just to look out and realize, man, Moses never got to make it here, but I'm experiencing this now. To see the garden tomb, this is one of the 2 places where Jesus may have been buried, so that was really cool. Capernaum is a major city where Jesus did a lot of his ministry, and then, of course, Jerusalem, where Jesus was crucified and where a lot of things happen. So, one of my favorite experiences was at the Jordan River. Again, we went to a lot of places that you probably read about in your Bible. Bethany, where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus went to. Jericho, the walls came tumbling down. Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. Mount of Beatitudes, Mount of Olives, etc., etc. But the Jordan River was one of my favorites. It was really simple, and not a lot of frou-frou like some of the places that we went to. I think Doug said it best when it was something about in the Western culture, when we see a biblical site, we want to preserve it and just honor it in a simple way, as you kind of saw with the garden tomb on the last slide. But in Eastern culture, they just make a big deal out of it. We went to several churches, and it was very gaudy, lots of mosaics. So. But the Jordan River was really special because this is the place where they think Jesus was baptized. There were 3 different sites along the Jordan River where it could have happened, but this is probably the most plausible. So I'm just going to read a passage from Jesus' baptism. This is from Matthew 3:13 through 17. Then Jesus went from Galilee, which we were also there, to the Jordan River to be baptized by John. But John tried to talk him out of it. "I'm the one who needs to be baptized by you," he said. "So why are you coming to me?" But Jesus said, "It should be done, for we must carry out all that God requires." So John agreed to baptize him. After his baptism, as Jesus came up out of the water, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and settling on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my dearly loved Son, who brings me great joy." So for me, this was one of the experiences on the trip where it was like, wow, Jesus was here. He was washed in this water, and the Holy Spirit descended on him. And just experiencing, how surreal that was, and to know that the Holy Spirit lives inside of us as well was really impactful. Another place that was really cool was the Sea of Galilee. Again, a lot of the places that we went were speculations, like, okay, Jesus was probably here, but the Sea of Galilee, we know he did a lot of his ministry there. When he walked on the water, he calmed the storm. It's around the area where he multiplied the loaves and fishes and met his disciples there for his last breakfast, or one of them. So the really fun part about being on the Sea of Galilee, it was just a really relaxing time. There's a beach right behind the place that we stayed. We were able to stay on, it's actually a lake, but the sea for a few days, and on the last day, we took a boat ride across the sea, and again, that was just a really worshipful time. We got to feed seagulls, which Allie was not crazy about. They were kind of scary, but it was really fun. And we took time to just sing together. One of the highlights was after we were done singing, we started singing a song in Hebrew, and the guy running the sound system on board had the song on his speaker system, and so we were able to hear it in a much better, much more eloquent way. And so kind of after that more somber moment, then we were able to start dancing, rhythmically moving on the boat. One of the locals taught us, and I don't know how well we did, but we had fun. So the Sea of Galilee was just really neat to be there, and again, just know that Jesus was there. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so like Heidi said, one of our objectives was to learn about the political situation that's going on over there. So the first thing I want to emphasize is that it's complicated. It is really, really complicated. So I'm going to try to say it in 5 sentences. A brief overview. Jewish people want to form a Jewish state called Israel. The land they want already had people in it. Those are the Palestinians, or sometimes called the Arabs. Both people groups feel like they have a right to the land. Sharing is hard. Conflict. So there's obviously way more that goes into it, but that's the very, very basics of it. So going into the trip, I was definitely more pro-Palestinian. So my thoughts were, well, the Jews left, and now they just want to come back and take their armies and storm in there and kick all these people out. Well, that's not fair. Like, the Palestinians have been living there for so long. And we met some people, which Ruth will talk a little bit more about that, but who had just crazy stories of interactions with the Israeli army and their persecution, and all the awful things that have been happening. And we saw the wall. It's this huge wall that the Israeli side has been building for security reasons, but the Palestinians see it as just a separation and a barrier between the groups. And there was so much graffiti just being like, I want to tear down this wall, and it's awful. And I think there was one that's like, when I grow up, I'm going to blast this wall with my laser vision. But they obviously have a lot of resentment towards it. So I was really like, the Palestinians are right and the Israelis are wrong. But then we heard some other sides of things. We started talking to some rabbis, and we saw Jerusalem, and I learned some more information. The Jews were initially promised some land in the League of Nations. It was under British control, and the British people kind of sold it out to other people, and were just like, we don't need to give this to the Jews. And so they kind of got stripped of that opportunity to have a Jewish state. I also learned that Judaism is about spreading their influence. I had one quote from a rabbi that said, Jews are not looking for a place to survive, but rather a place to have an influence. It is within their religion that they are doing well and they are serving God if they are influencing the communities around them. And yes, they can do that on an individual basis, but in order to do that on a global basis, they need a nation that they can speak from and influence, have influence in politics, or at least a voice to share their thoughts and their ideas. So there were a lot of things on both sides. I was like, well, they seem right in this, and they seem right about this, and they both kind of do things a little bit wrong also. So I don't know what to think. But then I also realized that both sides have been getting a very skewed vision of what's going on. The Israeli people don't know what the army is doing to the Palestinians, and the Palestinian people aren't all terrorists, and they don't all want to, blow things up. And so they're just getting very skewed visions of the other side. But a lot of people have so much hope and so much recognition that it's not about sides, it's about people. And so that was something that was really impactful for me. So we noticed some parallels. So just like there's some conflict between Israel and Palestine, there's that traditional rivalry between Tabor and Bethel. Of course, it's not as extreme as what's going on in the Middle East. But we did notice some parallels. Granted, our team got along very, very well, so it wasn't bad on our trip. But just the concepts of how the schools fight over sports and over, Mennonite Brethren versus General Conference. We had two people who would say, well, I'm Palestine and you're Israel and you're persecuting me right now, and I feel offended by that. Of course, they were joking, but it got me thinking that if the people over in Israel-Palestine can have so much hope for peace between their governments, how much more can we have hope for peace in our lives between the people around us, between Tabor and Bethel, between generation gaps, family members, just everyday people we interact with? And it gave me a lot of hope for my own life and the peace that we can find here. So what do we do? Be involved in politics here. It was crazy how much the people over there cared about the American political situation because it has such an impact on their lives. Here, it could be opinions and beliefs for us, but there, it's whether or not they get to live in their country, if they get to stay in their homes. There were some people who were really excited about Trump's decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and some people who were terrified by it. Our politics and our situation here, our voices, our vote matter to these people. So when we vote, it's not about just our thoughts and opinions, but it's about people's lives. And so we can make an impact with them by standing with them in our political opinions. Also, recognize that it is complicated. If anyone says, obviously this, or it's clear that this side is wrong, they don't know enough information. So recognize it is complicated and that we don't know everything that's going on. But most importantly, what so many people told us to bring back to the United States was, don't be pro-Palestine, don't be pro-Israel, be pro-peace.
So obviously we learned a lot about the political situation before the trip. We had a lot of readings and things that we had to do pre-trip. But during the trip, I think for most of us, one of the most impactful things was meeting people and learning about their perspective on the situation and hearing their stories. And there's so many people that we could talk about, so many stories that we could retell. But I'm only going to share a few. One of the days in Bethlehem, we had a free day, and it seemed at the end of the day as we were all gathering and recalling what we had done and telling stories about the day, almost everyone had met this gentleman, Aladdin, and his brother Abu, and those are not their real names, but those are the names that they share with Westerners who can't pronounce their names. But what was striking about Aladdin and Abu was their generosity and their hospitality. In Jordan and Israel and Palestine, people are extremely hospitable. We would go to shops and they would welcome us in, and even if we didn't buy things, they would make us tea and coffee and just want to converse with us and share their stories with us. And in particular, Aladdin went out of his way. He stayed up one night past 10 just in case we decided to come back again and talk with him. No expectations for whether or not we were going to buy anything for him. He just wanted to talk with us and share some hot beverages with us. And that was really convicting, being from the U.S. where we're really privileged. We have a lot more materially than these people do. But they were much more hospitable than I ever intend to be, and they went out of their way to do so. The next group were our tour guides, and they were very helpful people. We really enjoyed them. This is Maddie. He was our tour guide for the majority of the trip, the last 2 weeks in Israel-Palestine area, but was really something I wasn't expecting was that a lot of the tour guides weren't able to do a lot of things we were. They were restricted as far as movement, places they could be. And that was something that I struggled with a lot of guilt with for a while. Being an American tourist, we were able to just go through all these checkpoints, across borders, really easily. But the people that lived there, including our tour guides, really couldn't. They had a lot of restrictions and weren't able to do a lot of the things that we were able to do as tourists. But they were still so positive, and so helpful to us, and were willing to help us whenever we needed it. And we had a lot of sessions where different groups of people would come in and share their perspective and their stories on the situation. This one was the most impactful to me because a lot of the sessions were either hearing from a Palestinian's point of view or hearing from an Israeli's point of view, but this one was actually a combination of both. Ben, in this pictured above, had a daughter who was in the Israeli army. If you are an Israeli citizen, you're required to serve in the military, and she was killed from an attack on a military base there unexpectedly. And then next to him is, I'm going to say her name wrong, Mora, I think is how you say it. And she actually spent a lot of time growing up in the United States, met her husband here, and then moved there. They're Muslim. And her husband had been worshiping at a mosque, was driving back, and there was some kind of traffic, something weird was going on, and he kind of swerved and was shot by an Israeli soldier and killed. And then it was reported that he was a terrorist and had tried to attack the soldiers, which was completely not the story and not what happened at all. But it was really unique and hopeful to see these two individuals who could be completely justified in their bitterness and in trying to get revenge for what happened to these important family members that were close to them. But instead of doing that, they recognized that violence wasn't the answer, that revenge was not the answer. It was just going to cause more problems, and instead had formed this support group that incorporated both Palestinians and Israelis to support one another and try to work towards peace, instead of reacting, which was so tempting based on their emotions and what they had experienced, even though that was really relevant. So over the whole course of talking to all these people, it's really easy, especially in the United States, to think, here's the Israelis and here's the Palestinians. But it was a big takeaway for me to look beyond that and realize that each Palestinian and each Israeli has their own story and their own perspective on the situation. And despite all that they've been through, so many of them were full of hope and willing to forgive despite their circumstances.
Okay, thank you. So I get to talk about the fun stuff we did. One of probably the coolest things we did was like the second day, and we were in Jordan and we went to Petra. But the night before we went and actually saw everything, we went on a night tour, and we walked. It was all dark, and there were these lanterns lining the pathway on either side to walk down to the treasury. It's actually a tomb, but they call it the treasury. And that was really neat. And when we got there, it wasn't lit up. It was just all those lanterns. And then they had a little program where they played music, and this guy told a story, and then they lit it up, and it was just really neat. Oh, and then when we were in Bethlehem, we, of course, find a big hole in the ground. You all have to climb into it. So we all crawled into a cistern, which was kind of fun, but then kind of hard to get out. Oh, yeah, and Heidi showed the picture of when we went to Mount Tabor, which was really cool. We drove by Bethel, but they said there wasn't much to see, so we didn't stop. We saw a lot of mosaics. We saw so many mosaics, but this is probably our favorite. You can't really see it, so I took a picture of a placemat that they had. A lot of the mosaics that we saw, they're like, this is the Mona Lisa of Israel or something. But this one was almost completely intact, which was unusual for a lot of the mosaics. But when they were telling us about it, they were like, yeah, this is a greatly preserved mosaic, but the guy who made it was really bad. No, it's not supposed to be some abstract art. The guy just was really bad at making mosaics, and they weren't supposed to be unproportioned. Oh, and it's Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and then the rams in the bush, and then there's the servants, and they didn't have quite enough room for the other donkey, I see. And that was just a third of it. The other two parts were also great. We took a lot of, this was new that we did. We stopped at this castle, and just kind of oh, yeah, we'll stop here today. And we got to explore it, and that was super cool because it was in the Golan Heights, and it was a really cool view looking out over all the landscape, and it was just really neat because there were a lot of parts of the castle that were intact, and you could go down places. Oh, and we also got to float in the Dead Sea, which is always a plus, I guess, when you go to Israel, and it was fun. I mean, most people go there. Dr. Miller did not get in the water with us, unfortunately. And the food was really good. Probably our favorite food was the chicken shawarma on the left. Allie would have falafel instead, and that was really good too. And then we also had this in the Old City, and it looks like it's some sort of cheese with a marinara sauce, but it's actually super sweet. It was cheese on the bottom, but then it was a sweet top, which doesn't sound good, but it was really good. We also, as they said, we got along really well with the Bethel students, and we played a lot of games of Mafia, which is not very Mennonite, but we had lots of fun. I don't know how many games we played. And then this other one, we had Wi-Fi, so we did a lot of Snapchat, actually. I had to be told this story, as I'm obviously not awake, but there was one day when we were touring, and it was really the only day it was raining, but it was raining, and we were all really tired, and it was another one of those days where we tried to kind of go off and be oh, maybe let's go see this, but we got there, and Dr. Miller's who wants to get off the bus? And it was really quiet. And so we just moved on. And that was a small victory. At the end of the trip, we, the last night before we left for the airport, we had our last little service, and everyone was encouraged to bring an object that meant something to them about the trip and then share with the group. And that was really neat to see everyone's different takeaways and what they thought was impactful for them. And it was just neat to see that everyone probably came in with different views and stuff, but at the end they were able to take something different away, and just how the variety, and it was just neat to see how people's ideas and views of things changed as the trip went on. And I think that's it. And anything else? There's falafel in the cat for lunch, and it took me about 2, 3, 4, 5, probably 5 days to actually try. And it's actually good, so you should have some, and you're dismissed.